KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting cellist Joshua Roman, performing from his album Immunity, alongside music by J.S. Bach and more. Sunday, June 22nd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Reserve your tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.
Welcome back to another edition of listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. I'm Beth Accomando. With Alfonso Cuaron's recent multiple Oscar win and the San Diego Latino Film Festival entering its second quarter century, I felt it was the perfect time to pull up an archive interview I did with Mexican director Guillermo del Toro. Del Toro is one of my favorite directors, and one reason I love him is that he displays sympathy for monsters. I got to explore where that love came from in my 2006 interview with the director.
One night, I just stood in my crib and told the monsters in my room if they allowed me to go to pee, I would be their friend for the rest of my life. And that's how I fell in love with monsters.
But before we get to the rest of that interview, I want to briefly highlight the San Diego Latino Film Festival, which kicked off this week. It's been showcasing Mexican and Latino films for decades. Founder and executive director Ethan Vantillo says that being in a border city in these politically charged times, with the president talking about building a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, makes the festival all the more important.
Yeah, I mean, what's been happening at the border is the exact opposite of what we as an organization, as a film festival, have been trying to promote for the past 26 years. The festival's had screenings on both sides of the borders for almost every year. You know, we're trying to open up doors, we're trying to break down barriers, build bridges, and we have a federal government that's trying to do the exact opposite, right? But once again, so what is happening now, it just shows you how important our film festival is. I think maybe, we get a little complacent, like, oh, yes, Cuaron just won an Oscar, or, Salma Hayek's in a new Hollywood film. So everything must be going well, right? There's more Latinos in the industry. But what's really important about the film festival, and this is why we started it in the first place, is to break down barriers, to tell the world really about the realities of the Latino experience, not what they're seeing on mainstream news. We don't need the average person in the United States or our politicians, watching just news programs or looking at Hollywood like some of these kind of narco films, that Hollywood's producing. We really want them to understand the realities of the migrant experience, of the border experience, and that there is no crisis here on the border, for example. So I'm really excited this year. It was late November, December, we started something called the Migrant Voices Film Competition in partnership with the San Diego Union-Tribune. Very excited by this. Received over 293 entries all over the world. So we started getting migrant stories, immigration stories from France, from Africa, and unfortunately we just had to choose this border. So we chose 15 finalists that we're going to screen at the film festival. Then we're going to decide who's the grand prize winner. So these videos at least kind of go deeper, start interviewing the migrants, why they came, or look at the border also artistically as well, which I think is important. So I'm excited about Migrant Voices, and again, it just shows that the film festival is really needed. We need to see more films about the Latino experience. We need to see more films about the immigration experience, because ultimately I believe it's a universal story, right? Everyone's searching for a better life for their kids or for their family, so it's really important that this film festival try to show that.
Media Arts Center San Diego is the sponsor of the Latino Film Festival, and you guys do a lot of work with young kids and kind of giving them an outlet through film. And you have a program, a sidebar called Youth Voices.
Well, the Media Arts Center has been around for now 20 years, I learned. This is my 20th anniversary of the Media Arts Center San Diego, the actual nonprofit, right? So time flies, but one of the first programs that we created was called the Teen Producers Project. And so working with youth, mostly underserved youth, and migrant education, different schools across the county, and we have our own programs here now in our Digital Gym Cinema in North Park, but teaching them the importance of telling the stories of the realities in their community, whether it's a family immigration story or there's health issues in their community, or it's just about Little Saigon area and City Heights. It could just be community stories, but the importance for youth to learn the tools, learn how to edit, pre-production, production, post-production, and then what's wonderful about the film festival is they get the opportunity to screen it on a big screen. It's March 23rd at 2 p.m. in front of an audience, take photos of the red carpet. And so there's a sense of pride, too, that's really important. Anytime you're doing any kind of arts programming or arts education, teach the process of making it. It's a lot of work, as we all know, but also celebrate the success and have them in front of the screen talking about the film. And they also start learning about the issues, too. So they start talking about the issues and educating us or educating general audiences as well. So again, this is what keeps me going after many years, too, is that the film festival is not just a passive experience of just kind of watching these movies, right? It's about us as an organization trying to teach people to make their own content. And so every year getting this call for entries and getting these films from all around the world, we're having the film competition with the migrant voices, having youth produce content. Again, that's an active experience. And then on top of that, we screen the movies, and then we have close to 80-plus actors and filmmakers that are going to be in town. So almost every night you can learn about the experience and meet people, ask them questions about their film.
This past Academy Awards that just happened, Alfonso Cuaron was a winner, triple winner, I believe. And so what does that mean for you and the festival? I mean, does that help bring more attention to Latino film? And does it show that there's this ability to kind of move back and forth across the border?
Roma is just an amazing example. It was our highest grossing film here at the Digital Gym Cinema in North Park. I think we screened it over 10 weeks, which is just unheard of. It's usually they last a week, right? The phenomenon of the Roma film is incredible. It's just brought so many more people, to us. And then just, the celebration of the main actress, Yalitza, the celebration of an indigenous woman and seeing everyone at the Oscars. I think this is a major moment for all of us, right? And for Latino cinema and Mexican cinema. That said, I think there's a lot more work to be done, right? And so that's why we have the film festivals, that we need to keep on bringing new stories, bringing new filmmakers and new directors from, around the world to the film festival and promote their new films and videos, because I think it's important. Yes, Cuaron is amazing, but there's others out there that we need to find and keep on promoting.
That was San Diego Latino Film Festival founder and executive director Ethan Bontillo. I'm always amazed at how calm he seems right before the storm. I got to speak with him earlier in the week, and the festival just started last night. Since I'll be highlighting my interview with Guillermo del Toro later in the show, I thought it would be appropriate to also discuss the Un Mundo Extraño showcase at the San Diego Latino Film Festival. The showcase looks to genre films, most notably in horror and sci-fi. Moises Esparza is the festival programmer, and Miguel Rodriguez of Horrible Imaginings Film Festival helped to curate the Un Mundo Extraño showcase this year. Moises is one of the most thoughtful and meticulous programmers I've ever met. And as he enters his 6th year as the programmer at the San Diego Latino Film Festival, I asked him about the challenges he faces each year.
So every year there's the issue of relevancy. How do you maintain your festival attractive to your supporters who've been with you since the beginning, but also how do you appeal to brand new audiences? That has been my quandary for the past 6 years. But what I always go back to is select films that speak to issues that the San Diego community cares about. So through my programming, I tried to think of niche communities, very specific groups who I know will want to come see these films and will bring people to them. So in the festival lineup, you'll always see films on immigration and art, because those have been topics that have been successful at the festival. And then we always bring back successful showcases like Somos, which is our LGBTQ showcase, Un Mundo Extraño, which is our genre horror showcase. So it's always about connecting with the past while trying to look forward. So it's a challenge. I'm not going to say it's not. I think this year the programming is pretty unconventional in a very dynamic and exciting way.
This is a border city hosting a Latino film festival, and we have a very politically charged environment at the moment with talk of a border wall. So how does the festival respond to that? Is that something that you want to program for, or is that something where the films you're getting are different? How has it been?
Absolutely. We, as a festival that caters to a predominantly Latino audience, feel that it's our responsibility to address these issues head on, particularly the theme of immigration and the humanitarian crisis taking place at the border. So this year we have a special shorts program called Migrant Voices, which is a collection of 15 shorts, 3 minutes in length each, that tackle that issue head on. So we are, as a festival, taking a stance in solidarity with these asylum seekers and refugees, and we hope that comes through with this program.
Now, you have programs like this where it's very new or young filmmakers. You have Youth Voices, which is kids making films. But you're also looking kind of backwards, too, in the sense that you have a restoration of I Am Cuba. So this is an older film. What makes you want to kind of go back and showcase these kind of older titles, too?
Yes, as a festival, it's always, you're stuck in the middle in a way. You're trying to look to the past, but also reaching for the future. So a way to stay connected to the roots of cinema and perhaps expose audience members to a tradition they may not be so familiar with is to maybe go back into the archives and pull out these restorations that may either not have been screened in San Diego before or at another film festival, or people only had the opportunity to see them at home, never on the big screen. So this year we're screening I Am Cuba.
Soy Cuba. Una vez aquí desembarcó Colón.
Salón Mexico, the classic Mexican film, and Mi Vida Loca, the Chicano classic. So retrospective programming is something that I've always wanted to bring to the festival. This is the first year, at least in my tenure here, that we've given these films their own showcase. So it's called Tesoros, or Treasures. You know, it's really nerve-wracking to screen these movies because I don't know who's gonna show up. I hope people do, and I think they'll be excited by what they see and also moved, and then they'll also be able to examine how those films really set the groundwork for a lot of the other types of films they'll see at our festival. So I try to connect everything together, and maybe not so obvious ways when you first flip through the program, but if you sit through the programming, you'll definitely see bridges and connections. And I'm really excited to screen I Am Cuba because it's a 4K restoration, and that film has been so deeply influential to so many modern filmmakers. So to be able to see it on the big screen is going to be an experience. And I myself have only seen it on my computer. So during that actual screening, I'm going to sit down and kind of treat myself in a way to seeing it on the big screen.
Now, you brought up Un Mundo Extraño as this sidebar that you have. As a programmer for a film festival, I always feel like festivals are the place where you can take risks. Mm-hmm. And with this Un Mundo Extraño, it seems like you're taking a bit of a risk because these are not going to necessarily be the crowd pleasers. Why do you feel it's important to showcase films like this that are not going to please everyone? That, you know, they are sometimes challenging, and they are sometimes films that people may not want to see.
As a programmer, of course, I hope that people show up to the movies that I book. However, I don't necessarily set being a crowd-pleasing festival as a priority for me. I want to screen confrontational cinema. I want people to feel a little bit uncomfortable. I want them to feel like they've seen something new and fresh and innovative. I had the pleasure of including a programmer's note at the beginning of our program this year for the first time. So I laid out really, to the point, saying that not all of our movies have happy endings. And if our festival was full of films like that, then why have a festival like this? We're all about programming films with new voices, challenging topics. And it's really, I think, from a personal place, through film school or through my own exploration of films and genres and modalities, it's when I see a movie that makes me think, oh God, that was weird, or oh, how bizarre, that I go back to think, why did I feel like that? How can I expand my horizon to learn more about this particular sensibility? Just as someone who wants to become more enriched, really, in the art of filmmaking. You know, I like challenging audiences. I'm not really necessarily interested in whether our supporters like the movie in a very conventional way, or what appeals to me is if they're willing to have a discussion about what they just watched, because I think that fosters growth and understanding. So for someone to have an initial reaction like, oh, I didn't like that, or I hated that, what interests me more is digging a little deeper, like, why didn't you like that, or what about this dislike can we dissect to maybe make it more appealing for you in the next round, and also for myself to learn as a programmer.
Miguel, you are the festival director for Horrible Imaginings Film Festival, which showcases horror films, and you are curating these films along with Moises. How do you feel about kind of a festival's purpose in highlighting works like this?
Well, I think that the purpose of a festival is to offer a platform for various types of expression, and those modalities are not always pleasant. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they are not. And frankly, there's an audience out there for things that are not saccharine or more joyful or musicals or romantic comedies. There is definitely an audience who want to be challenged by cinema and who want to use this art form to go down or experience a darker path. So I just view this as an opportunity to cater to those audience members as well.
Now, you mentioned it showcases horror, but it's not exclusively highlighting horror films. So how do you define kind of the qualities that a film needs to be part of this Un Mundo Extraño?
So really, the name itself, One Strange World, Un Mundo Extraño, is really, I just view that as using a fantastic lens to deal with real life topics. So we might be able to talk about something that causes anxiety or fear, and use something like science fiction or horror or crime thriller, for example, to access that and maintain a little bit of distance from it. But honestly, all I'm really looking for are films that are a little off-kilter and, as we said, maybe a little uncomfortable, or from my personal view, films that showcase a topic that a filmmaker is using to express some type of anxiety about the world, and using a fantastic means or an unusual means to get that message across.
And Moises, what led the festival to want to create a sidebar for this?
Growth and expansion, and being able to cater to audience members who want to see something maybe a little bit out of bounds, out of the ordinary. It's our responsibility as a festival to not rest on our laurels in a way. And really, I think there's a demand for this type of movie, I think, in our community. And we've seen that either through programming, through Film Geeks, Horrible Imaginings, Digital Gym Cinema. There is a community here that wants to see these type of movies.
Now, one of them is going to be on opening night, which is Murder Me Monster, which I have to say is my favorite of the three films programmed. I don't want to give away anything, but it is a monster film on a certain level, but how would you describe it, or how would you kind of define it?
You know what? That film for me is defined by how it opens with such a hit. Now, again, without giving anything away, the audience needs to prepare themselves for the first 3 minutes of this film. But after that, it kind of takes a more measured pace, and it's certainly it's a dark family experience, I would say. It's full of atmosphere and surreal imagery that might be unexpected after such a shocking beginning. But what I find interesting about it is one thing I think is across the board in Un Mundo Extraño this year is collaborations from different cultures, So this is a co-presentation of Chile, Argentina, and France. And I think you have certain elements and influences of all of those cultures in it. And that just leads to this nightmarish stew of a film that's really hard to explain. But, I think it will satisfy those people who like surreal nightmares and who like just a creature feature. They're all in there. So this is something for horror fanatics, but it is a lot more than that.
And I think, Moises, you used the term kind of a thinking man's monster movie.
Yeah, thinking man's or woman's horror film, really. It's insightful and it speaks to interior fears, I think, becoming exterior. There is the element of seeing the monster and that shock value of finally witnessing what's causing all the mayhem. But there are, as Miguel mentioned, surreal moments and really vivid imagery that I think evoke a explicit feeling of dread. And that dread carries from frame to frame. And it's less about, in a way, who is doing it, and the greater question becomes, what are we doing to ourselves? Which I think is a really horrific question to contemplate. And I think the film tries its best to answer that in both interior and exterior ways.
It also knows how to compose images in a way that is really evocative. There's one image of just 3 people riding in a car, but it's something about it just reminds me of every time I felt uncomfortable driving down a very dark and lonely road. And it's perfect. It's perfect how it gets those feelings across.
Yeah, and it's so stylized, and there's such care to each frame that's on screen. And then you have classic tropes, dark, foggy forests, whodunits. There's all these archetypes that you recognize, and then the innovative stuff kind of comes creeping behind the door, and you're like, what am I watching? This is hallucinatory. This is beyond almost the realm of comprehension. And it makes for a very exciting and
the question: how do people live like this? You ask that question a lot through it. Yeah.
And it also evokes a little sympathy or compassion for the monster.
I think the last shot of the film is unforgettable in many ways, but you also think maybe this monster isn't that bad. I don't know.
So everyone should stay through to the end of the film.
Watch the movie.
Stick through it. You'll be rewarded.
One of the films, La Casa Lobo, is not so much the storyline that is so strange and fantastical, but the actual style of the filmmaking. So describe what that's like and why that helps it qualify for this sidebar.
So La Casa Lobo is a Chilean film, and it is a stop-motion animated feature. And I do want to warn anybody who thinks that stop-motion animated is for kids. This one features the real-life story of the Colonia Dignidad, which is a kind of cartel that was started by a former Nazi who ended up in Chile. And it is narrated by the former Nazi himself, or at least an analog of him.
Seguramente usted ya ha tenido la oportunidad de probar el inigualable sabor y textura de la miel La Colonia.
So this stop motion goes some very dark places, but just like the last one, it does it. Stop motion is surreal in and of itself. You don't even have to do anything. but it is strung together with certain imagery that is just not only stunning and immediately engaging, but also very off-putting. This one is, for my money, this is one that goes beyond a film-going experience and is just an experience. You come to a film festival for a film like this that you're almost certainly not going to experience a different way.
Well, and it's also just kind of endlessly clever and innovative in the way it creates its imagery.
Absolutely. And it's a conceptual art film. It's one that you almost see the work behind each frame, but it doesn't matter that you see that labor because what you're seeing on screen is so wholly creepy and bizarre, and I've never seen a project like this. So as a programmer, when I see something that's supposed to be perhaps innocent and, as Miguel said, for children, and gets turned on its head in a very adult way, I mean, it makes you take notice, and it is going to make people's skin crawl.
You know, a lot of it is, it plays with images of innocence itself.
Like fairy tales.
Yeah, well, it is a fairy tale.
Yes.
It's a fairy tale retelling of this, what happens when a Nazi escapes at the end of World War II, and it completely is allowed to rule the land in his newfound home in Chile at a time in their history where they were ripe for that kind of thing. But, you've got little children, you've got pretty pictures, you've got dancing, and it's all of these images of innocence are corrupted. Oh, yeah. And I think that lends itself to being, kind of heartbreaking. It's more than just horror, it's actually tragic.
And the third film in the showcase, Is It You, Father? You talk about unease, and one of the things in this film that creates so much unease seems to be the sound design and the music. What is this one about?
So, Eres Tu Papa, it's a Cuban film, and what I find interesting about this film is the filmmaker is Cuban by birth, but grew up and went to school in the UK, and wanted to do a film that is a psychological thriller that reflected his own kind of conflicted feelings about his home country of Cuba. This comes especially at an interesting time with the U.S.'s newfound or kind of burgeoning new relationships with Cuba in the last couple of years. But ultimately, the feelings of this filmmaker for Cuba is reflected in this very abusive relationship of a family to their father figure. And I mean, this domestic situation is really intense. And despite all that, this family has a need and a longing for that abusive father figure when he disappears. And so it's kind of this back and forth about, being lost in the love of this authority figure. Ultimately, its strength as a psychological thriller is in kind of, manipulating us with sound and images and music. I think that is where the the strength of the effects come from this film. But I was drawn to it for the very personal aspects of why this film got made.
And what's interesting about this film, too, is that you may think you know where it's going at a certain point, and early on there's kind of a turn, and you think, how is it going to go on for another hour when it seems like it's hit a climax in a certain way?
Yeah, I definitely think that was an intentional feeling, because the film starts out about one thing, but then it completely turns that on its head, because it's really about something else. And I'm trying to talk about this without revealing anything, but the rest of the film is largely the actual thesis behind it. It's the whole point. So if people do wonder if there's a sudden dramatic change of pace, you are really at the midpoint. And the rest of it is really the most important stuff, so stick around.
One of the other sidebars that you were focusing on is called In the Ring, and you have a quartet of films that are about boxing and lucha libre. What prompted this?
I think as a programmer, you have to follow trends in what you receive in your submissions. And if there are 4 or 5 films about a similar theme, you put them together into a showcase. They celebrate such a rich tradition of lucha libre, wrestling, mixed martial arts. And the films are all about, I think, perseverance and really relatable struggles that I think even if you're not an athlete, even if you're not a boxer, you'll be able to root for these individuals on screen. I look at them as almost like real-life Rockies in a way, people just struggling in the ring, trying to make it happen for themselves. All the films will be really enjoyed by our audience. It's a pretty crowd-pleasing selection of films.
That was Moises Esparza, San Diego Latino Film Festival programmer, and Miguel Rodriguez, director of Horrible Imaginings Film Festival. Together, they curated Un Mundo Extraño at this year's festival. Now I'm excited to share my interview with Guillermo del Toro. I got to speak with him in 2006 for the release of Pan's Labyrinth. Del Toro represents a new breed of Mexican filmmaker, one who straddles multiple cultures and works globally. Pan's Labyrinth was a co-production of Mexico, Spain, and the United States. It's set after the Civil War and delivers a parable about choice and disobedience. Those qualities define the various characters in Pan's Labyrinth. The fascist captain chooses to tyrannize, but the housekeeper and a doctor choose disobedience. A young girl named Ophelia provides our entry into the world of Pan's Labyrinth.
Hola. Hola.
Ophelia moves between the real world and a fantasy one. Cutting across boundaries is old hat for filmmaker Guillermo del Toro. Ethan Vantillo has shown Guillermo del Toro's films at the San Diego Latino Film Festival.
I think Guillermo del Toro is a border crosser, both physically by producing and directing films in Mexico, United States, and Spain. And then through his films cross all types of genres, all types of categories, and reach audiences at many different levels.
That's for sure. The director delivers a parable of Franco-era Spain in Pan's Labyrinth, but he also delivered the Hollywood hit Hellboy in 2004 and won an Oscar for his recent Shape of Water. Pan's Labyrinth contains both incredible beauty and horrific violence. Being able to maintain a personal style, whether the film is a studio-backed project like Hellboy or an independent film like Pan's Labyrinth, is key to Del Toro's success. It also serves as inspiration to young Mexican filmmakers like Kathy Alberich.
He could have made Pan's Labyrinth with millions in English, and he decided to listen to his heart and listen to his roots and make it in Spanish.
Tijuana filmmaker Aaron Soto appreciates Del Toro's ability to enter the global marketplace without sacrificing cultural identity.
He's not going to change Hollywood because that's impossible, but I think he's going to put something from his root and from his culture in American cinema. And I know he feels like a Mexican director, but at the same time, I think he feels like a director of the world, of the universe. He doesn't have boundaries, and that's what I like about him more. That because art doesn't have a nationality.
I began my 2006 interview with Del Toro by asking him to explain how he came to fall in love with monsters.
Yeah, what happened is when I was a kid, the first time I saw any lasting image of horror was through a TV program called The Outer Limits. After seeing that program, I unfortunately was scared terribly by my brother, and I peed on my bed. It was actually my crib. And then after that night, I started seeing monsters in my room. And every time I would see the monsters in my room, I wanted to go to the bathroom, and I couldn't. So I ended up peeing in my crib again. And my mother started punishing me. And one night, I just stood in my crib and told the monsters in my room if they allowed me to go to pee, I would be their friend for the rest of my life. And that's how I fell in love with monsters.
So, in your new film, in Pan's Labyrinth, where do you say your sympathies lie in that film?
I actually think that it's clear in Pan's Labyrinth that to me the biggest monster is the fascist captain, and that the monsters that inhabit the fantasy world are actually much more benign or much more less perverse creatures than him.
But do you feel that you can find some kind of sympathy or compassion even for him, or not at all?
I think there is understanding. I think, as Jean Renoir used to say, everybody has the reason. You know, there's not such a thing as a guy that does something terrible and doesn't have a backstory to make sense of it himself emotionally. But I do believe that that doesn't mean I have to artificially nuance into everybody being good and bad at the same time. I do believe that there are people that do evil things, and that's what they do. And I think this is a character that is like that. It's a sociopath.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were born and raised in Mexico, correct?
Yes. Yes.
And what made you interested in the Spanish Civil War, which is the backdrop for this film and for Devil's Backbone?
Well, the reality is that it's a war that is very close to Mexico. In the 30s and the 40s, we were absolutely open to taking a huge amount of immigrants to take refuge from the Republic in Spain to Mexico, and they literally changed the way Mexico was. I mean, the culture, the arts, particularly cinema. There was a huge influence of this generation of Spanish refugees in the way Mexican cinema shaped. And I believe that we became very, very close, and anecdotally, I became very close with people that arrived at Mexico at a very young age and were refugees. One of them became sort of a father figure and a mentor to me. And the more I read about the Civil War through his guidance, the more I learned that it was a war that was crucial, not only to Mexico, but to the entire world. Because it's right at the crux of World War II. And it actually continues in a secret way after 1939. It continues with a resistance that was never either acknowledged or supported by the international community.
Now, do you remember specifically any stories or incidents that people, refugees like that, told you that really made an impact on you as a young child that stuck in your mind?
Well, I remember one of the saddest things was to know that a lot of them came like any other refugees. They came into our country with a career and a past that, for example, the mother of this person, Emilio, his mother was a teacher, a school teacher. She was fully prepared to be a Republican teacher and so forth. And they couldn't work as doctors, they couldn't work as teachers, they couldn't work as architects, and many of them ended up working in menial jobs. That was one thing that impressed me. But one thing that made it into the movie is the fact that a death or a disease or a death in the family would take sometimes months, if not years, to reach the people in the mountains, the resistance, because the letters were hand-delivered by people that were aiding the resistance, and they took food and medicine and whatever was needed up to the mountain by hand. And many of those couriers were killed. And a little bit of that is in the movie.
What do you think in the film will resonate most for contemporary audiences coming to see it?
I think that the movie is about two things that are incredibly important now, and they were incredibly important then. And those are choice and disobedience. I think that we have just gone through an election in this country that shows the importance of those two, especially when you had a structure behind power that was telling us to simply obey and conform and support and not question, I think disobedience is the threshold of responsibility, you know? And I think that you have to go by your instinct, and the movie tries to show through a parable that choice and disobedience go hand in hand sometimes.
You know, what I heard about the film before I saw it was a lot of reference to this, the aspect of being a parable and a fairy tale. And in fairy tales, you often deal with fears. And in this film, what I really liked was this sense of fears, but in a very kind of much more grounded and realistic way, how these people overcame their fear. So it was an interesting way to deal with something that you typically get in fairy tales, but in kind of from a very different angle on it.
Yeah. Yes. Well, the idea was to actually show permutations of the same angle. You know, there was permutations of the same crux, which is, do I obey blindly, or do I stand by my choices? And you see it on each of the characters, adult or child. And each of them has a choice, but takes it or not. The doctor, the wife, the fascist captain, you know? And how when you displace that choice to a religion or a political faction, and you stop being responsible for your choices and you just follow orders, that's one ending. And if you decide to stand up, that's another ending. And I believe that it's about holding fast on your choices, because much like in Hellboy or any of the other movies, I try to say your choices ultimately define who you are. You know, you can do wrong things. We all make mistakes. We all have defects. But ultimately, your choices, what you do with things eventually, is what defines who you are.
One of the things that surprised me in the film from, again, you know, you set up certain expectations when you go in to see a film sometimes, but I was surprised at how horrifying some of the scenes actually were, and not in a bad way. I mean, I thought they had an incredible impact. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you approach those scenes that dealt with the torture and not the fantasy elements, but the very kind of grounded and realistic ones that dealt with violence.
Well, to me, violence, much like sex, is not just one single type of thing, you know. It really can be used in so many different ways, actually, in a single film. In the movie, there is moments of violence that actually are built by anticipation and emotion, like the leg amputation, for example, but that are ultimately never shown. Or the final shooting, I won't spoil it for anyone, but it can be, you know, so many people get shot in a war movie that you actually have to almost view it as a naturalistic thing. Otherwise, it becomes morbid, you know. So each of the moments in the film have different values. Some of them are meant to shock you and make you feel the pain of the character. And others can be used as a metaphor that is almost at a fairy tale level. For example, the captain sawing his own mouth. That's the moment where he becomes the big bad wolf, really, in the movie. It's a larger-than-life gesture that shows this guy will not, no matter what. So each of the moments of shock and pain in the movie have different values depending on the moment.
Now, I've read that in your own life, you've been witness to violence and seen dead bodies. And how do you think your kind of experience with real violence has affected the way you've shown it or made you different from Hollywood directors who maybe have never seen that kind of thing?
I think that I'm speaking from a knowledge they don't have. You know, I know that violence by our nature, by human nature, fascinates us. And by fascinates us, I mean in the literary sense of the word, which is we cannot pry our eyes away from it. You know, and I'm not talking just about a traffic accident and how you linger on it as you drive by, but I'm talking about the fact that it's one of the basic human endeavors. You know, it's a hunt, gather, reproduce, you know, as mammals. It's so we, I speak about it from a humanistic point of view, but from an absolutely intimate knowledge of it, because I have experienced it in my life, and I've been the victim of, and I've been the witness of a lot of violence in Mexico, including the kidnapping of my father. So it's not a detached view ever. Even if I do sometimes choose to do it as an action spectacle in things like Hellboy, it's never detached. It's always meant and calibrated to be either cartoonish, balletic, and representational, like kabuki theater almost, or it's meant to be emotionally provoking. So I think that when you haven't experienced, you can have a perverse fascination with violence. When you have experienced it, the language and the syntax and the way you articulate it is different.
Do you think there's a certain Mexican sensibility that covers it? And I ask this because I've seen a lot of Korean films recently, and it seems like the quality of the violence in those films has a different kind of spin to it than a lot of other films, and it seems to come from the fact that the people making these films come from a country that's divided, where you've got families on both sides of the border, and all the violence always seems to come down to this very kind of divided sensibility. And I'm wondering if you think that, growing up in Mexico gives the violence any different kind of a spin or flavor.
I believe so. I believe it does, because not only the violence, but everything about the movie, the willingness to mix and match and transpose, and the transgression of the genres, mixing a war movie with a fairy tale, the desire to not conform, the distrust of institutions, and the celebration of fantasy. All that is very Mexican. I think that the movie is definitely a Mexican movie about a Spanish subject.
Does Catholicism play into it as well?
Inevitably. Once a Catholic, always a Catholic. And inside of me, I may pretend or try to be the wild man, but inside of me lives our little choir boy. I still am the little guy that was the official spokesman for the Virgin Mary when I was 10.
Well, it also seems, I was raised Catholic, and it also seems like I remember having the Bible read to me, and sometimes some of those stories were really scary. And I mean, that's kind of the first exposure to horror in a certain way.
They're incredibly graphic. I mean, when one says this is Old Testament violence, it's meant to be both in the how absolutely apocalyptic the wrath of something is, as much as how representational and how graphic it can become. I mean, I remember parables and stories in the Old Testament that describe mutilation in exacting detail. The Maccabi brothers and or the torture of a saint, or there's so many permutations of violence in the Bible, mass destruction. I mean, and not only that, in Mexico, the Catholic imagery is particularly gory. When you're praying to Jesus in Mexico, you're praying to an image that is almost forensic in nature. Jesus has purple knees, purple face, bruises, bleeding bruises, exposed bone. I mean, it's truly almost like CSI.
Now, I think I read a quote from you where you had mentioned that a lot of horror films use horror to talk about inhumanity, but that you tried to kind of, to not just do that, but to also see maybe a sense of hope for mankind or humanity?
I really think that horror contains a particular code of poetics that is all its own. And it may be exercised accidentally by a journeyman in an Italian film or in a Mexican film, but certainly is the one that approximates metaphor and parable the closest. And in such is one of the most poetic and liberating genres in cinema, because it is the metaphor made flesh. And it's spiritual by virtue that the eldest spiritual tales, the oldest spiritual tales, will always be about angels battling demons or men battling demons, and angels. It's wrestling with an angel all night. Ultimately, that's fantasy. That's the horror. That's the fantasy, and I think as such we can articulate particularly difficult spiritual subjects through this genre.
You've been able to move very successfully from Mexico to Hollywood to Spain, and from kind of more commercial films to very personal films. What do you think has allowed you to do that, or made you successful at doing that? Because it seems to be something that's not that easy to pull off.
It's not easy, believe me. I don't think it was easy ever. I think it may seem easy, but the fact is I've been working in film, in feature films. I worked on film since I was 15, but I've been doing feature films since I was 28. I am now 42 and I have 6 films. So approximately, since 93 to now, I've been doing a film every 2.5 years. That's more or less the average rate, and that's not pretty fast. I could have made a film every year if I wasn't so stubborn. And I think that's the key to do what I like to do. I have to be stubborn and kind of unyielding in a way, because I do the movie that needs to be done in the format that I have at hand. Yeah, I would have never attempted to do, for example, Pan's Labyrinth in Hollywood, because we would have audience tested it, and the girl would be alive and well all the way through the movie, and we would have a super happy ending with dancing little creatures or something. And by the same token, I would never attempt to do something like Hellboy in an independent scheme, because then I wouldn't have the scope or the freedom technically to do it. And they are both personal films to me, curiously enough. I cannot claim the same about Blade, or unfortunately about Mimic, because that movie was tampered with and the other one was part of an already ongoing franchise. But I can claim it on Hellboy, and I think that I'm stubborn about making the movie I need to do in the format I need to do it.
You've been able to kind of cross over from mainstream and art films. Do you think that your audiences, that there's a crossover too, that your Mexican audience or the audience that goes to art house films will embrace your commercial films, and the people who see your commercial films are more likely to maybe cross over and see Pan's Labyrinth?
At this stage, I do believe that. It was not true always, obviously. I think that people that like Kronos were sorely disappointed by Mimic, for example. I don't blame them, by the way. People that like Devil's Backbone were sorely disappointed by Blade 2. But little by little, I've been trying to show through my work that ultimately I'm articulating the same universe. And there seemed to be a little more crossover every time, So I believe that is becoming true, if it wasn't always.
Well, it definitely seems, even in films like Mimic and Blade, it seems like there's still a personal touch of yours in those, that you can kind of see something of you in them, even though they may not have been exactly what you wanted to make. There still seems to be some essence of your
I absolutely. I enjoy the hell out of making Blade 2. It actually is one of the most exciting and amusing and fulfilling, exhilarating, I would say, experiences I've ever had, because it was pure joy. It was like the difference between dining out in a little French bistro and having a 6-pack and a pizza, I think that I enjoy both, and they are both part of my personality in a strange way. But I think that when you sincerely attempt to do a movie that is personal in whatever format it is, something of you remains. And Mimic was the same thing. I was sincerely trying to make the best damn giant bug movie ever made.
Well, even if you didn't like it, it still probably is the best giant bug movie ever made.
No, I think that that belongs to them.
All right. I wanted to ask you about Hellboy. I saw you at the Comic-Con, and I believe you made a comment where you said, I'm not going to let anybody read the script to Hellboy 2 because you'd cry, since it's so beautiful and it's not going to be made. and now the film is going to be made. Do you think that those kind of comments at Comic-Con had any kind of impact on the film eventually getting made?
No, unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, the industry reacts to events like Comic-Con or the internet like a barometer, but they don't react to it as a rule of thumb, and they don't react to it to greenlight movies or campaign for them successfully. That's unfortunate up to a point, because I think we are not by any means an objective audience. We have our particular kinks and preferences, but we are a voice that should be heard, and I think that it is not taken into account as much. But I do believe that it's an audience that is becoming more and more vocal. And for a while, we were gaining a little bit of terrain in how we influence the decisions at a studio. Now I think that's it's dissipating a little bit.
But Hellboy 2 is being made, correct?
Oh, I believe so.
Okay, good.
If not, someone should tell me now, because I'm in pre-production.
Well, and also I wanted to ask, at Comic-Con, I noticed a lot of young filmmakers came up to you and handed you their DVDs. Yeah. And unlike a lot of other celebrities, I saw you really take those and you told your assistant, I said, be careful, these are my treasures. And I'm just wondering, do you feel kind of an obligation or an interest in kind of encouraging this next generation of filmmakers?
Well, I feel it's a privilege. And I actually, unfortunately, it takes me months and months to get to them. But for example, I will tell you a little anecdote. I just finished producing a $4 million movie in Spain called The Orphanage. And guess what? The guy that directed it showed me his short films, And I liked him, and I said, what do you want to do in a feature? And we agreed, and we did this movie. So I believe that the only way to stay young and fresh is to stay young and fresh, and to really be aware of what the language is now and what the way of telling stories is now. And I don't mean the ones that go to the mainstream like MTV or commercials, but the ones that are being brewed by people that love movies. And, we are destined as storytellers to have our time, and then our time comes and goes. It passes. We will become irrelevant with time. But we are not going to go gently into the good night.
Now, because this is for radio and I can't show people a clip from the film, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the visual style and the visual approach you took to creating this fantasy world or this other world of Pan's Labyrinth.
Gladly. Well, the idea of this movie was more influenced by literature or paintings than by film. The film was found in the dynamics on how to tell the story. But the aesthetics of the film are very influenced by illustrators like Arthur Rackham, who was a late Victorian illustrator of fairy tales, or Kay Nielsen, or Edmund Dulac, who were both illustrators of fairy tales. And Nielsen later moved to California and worked for Disney, designing things for Sleeping Beauty or Fantasia, And their sense of style is very pictorial, very rich in texture. And it was also influenced by a school of paintings, the symbolist painters, particularly Arnold Böcklin and Carlos Schwab and some of them, Odilon Redon, and because they tried to use the pagan imagery and the pagan iconography of elder gods from long-lost past to evoke things that are more Jungian or Freudian, or to use the mythology to gaze into the inner workings of the human soul, And I really love that. I love the pagan mythology as much as I love the Catholic mythology. And Pan's is equal parts, both visually and in terms of the story. I think that there is a certain iconography that comes from fairy tales. I tried to quote briefly Alice in Wonderland, The Wizard of Oz, even Hans Christian Andersen, The Little Matchbook Girl. So the movie is a very strange melange, a mixture of genres, and ultimately it creates sort of its own little niche along with Devil's Backbone.
How did you kind of come upon pulling all these elements together for the script? I mean, was this something that you've been kind of percolating over a long period of time to bring it all together?
No, I've always been like that. I mean, Chronos was already that strange of a film. It was more genre because it was a vampire film, but it was already crazy to do an alchemically correct Catholic vampire movie set in Mexico. And I don't know what genre fully my movies belong in, because although I adore horror like crazy, I'm interested in the aesthetics of the genre and the freedom of the genre, but I'm not interested in the scares. I've never been, really. Devil's Wagon was, its whole purpose was to make the ghost a tragic figure, you know. And I believe that, the crisscrossing, the mixture of elements, just leads me to believe that whatever shelf these movies would stand on rightfully in the video club, it would be a very sparse shelf. There are not many there. And I don't mean by that they are worthy or unique, just that they are pretty strange.
Now, you mentioned that what might resonate in this film for contemporary audiences, this notion of choice and disobedience, was it current events that kind of prompted you to make this particular film now? Yes,
absolutely. I felt that the world was definitely destroying our innocence and destroying imagination. I still fear that. One of the main things that I fear right now is that the most prosaic obedience and the most prosaic materialism is eating away our spirituality and our imagination. And by spirituality, I don't mean any denomination, religious-wise. I don't think anyone has a hold on spirituality or rightfulness in there. I think that just the fact that we can not think beyond dollars and cents. I think that dollars and cents is such a nonsense. I believe that we are approaching almost like reality TV existences, where we are becoming incredibly prosaic, and fantasy and imagination are the only doorways to spirituality these days. The only ones that we accept in a world where I think cynicism has usurped intelligence. So all these things were in my mind, along with the incredible swing to the right that up until this week seemed to be taking a hold of most of the first world. And frankly, the sometimes ridiculous swing that seemed to go with the blessings of the people, that entire countries seem to be just going towards obedience, blind obedience. I'm very happy the elections came out the way they came out. I mean, I as a citizen of the world, I acknowledge the fact that the destiny of America affects the rest of the world, and I was very happy to see the elections turn out the way they turned out.
I noticed that you screened the film at Fright Fest in London and actually appeared there.
Yes.
I find that great, because I think there's so many directors who would kind of look at that and feel like they would be condescending to come to something like that. And and for you, it seems like you genuinely enjoy that kind of venue and think that's a thoroughly appropriate place to be. Is that true?
It is true. I mean, we actually made it a point. I made it a point that we were going to go from Cannes, official selection at Cannes, to Fright Fest in London. Because I believe that the moment you start believing your own press, you start dying slowly. The moment you become an auteur, the moment you become so sacred that you have to deny genre and deny passion and deny what really gets you going, you start dying a little bit. And I actually said in the introduction to Fright Fest, I don't know if this movie fully belongs to Fright Fest, but I do.
Well, that's great. I appreciate that. And then one last thing, I'm doing something for Thanksgiving on films, and I've been asking people if they could pick a film or two that they feel thankful for some reason. And I was wondering if there was one or two films that you would mention in that context.
I am very thankful for James Whale's Frankenstein, because I believe that it is one of the most beautifully articulate ways of saying how we are thrown into this world by a creator that does not care for us and how we have to find our way in it. And I'm very thankful for Taxi Driver for being a variation of the Frankenstein monster in an urban environment.
All right. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate all your films tremendously. And
thank you very much, and thanks for the call.
That was Mexican filmmaker Guillermo del Toro. I spoke with him in 2006 about Pan's Labyrinth. His next project to be released is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which he produced and wrote. Thanks for listening to another episode of listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. Coming up on future episodes, I'll be looking to the work of film archivists and the TCM Film Festival. Thanks to everyone who's left reviews for the show. If you like what you hear, please recommend the show to a friend and leave a review on iTunes. It helps Cinema Junkie get to more listeners. Till our next Film Fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt or for home improvements by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Learn more at splatero.com.